The following program does not necessarily represent the views and opinions of Reality Radio 101, its advertisers and sponsors, or its listening audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with psychologist, author, and speaker, Dr. Anna Baranowski, where mind, mood, and what matters to you are discussed. We're broadcasting live from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, on Reality Radio 101. Our email address is instudio101@gmail.com. And now, your host of the Bear Psychology Radio Show, Dr. Anna Baranowski.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be back with you again today. We have some very interesting authors joining us today, and I'm excited to present the topic. It's one that we haven't really dealt with before. This is a book called Healing Begins With Us, Breaking the Cycle of Trauma and Abuse and Rebuilding the Sibling Bond by Ronni Tichenor and Jennie Weaver. And these authors are sisters who grew up in a home where there was significant addiction and abuse. And, you know, as many of our listeners know, we have covered the issue of childhood emotional neglect and abuse in the past. But the focus today that really adds something new is the idea that there can be a terrible injury to the sibling bond, a bond that you may really benefit from having in life, that may be part of your resiliency, part of your important network that you need in order to really thrive in life. And in families where there's been significant addiction, childhood abuse, or neglect, this sibling bond can be damaged badly. Well, Ronni and Jennie can teach us a little bit about how to fix that sibling bond. In their experiences, they had to work hard to develop that closeness again after years of family interference and ways in which the addiction kept them from actually staying connected and together for many, many years. So we'll want to look at that piece of it. But I also think it's really important to reflect on the other elements of how abuse, domestic violence in the home, emotional and physical neglect have impacted Ronni and Jennie. And despite all of that, they have been able to move forward in their lives, develop their own careers, marry, have children, and from the sounds of it, live pretty good lives despite all that they have been exposed to. So welcome both of you, Ronni and Jennie, today. I want to say that Ronni has a Ph.D. in Sociology with a specialization in family studies, and Jennie has a degree from Vanderbilt School of Nursing and was a family nurse practitioner for over 25 years. So welcome both of you. And thank you for joining me in this conversation today. I want to remind people that if you have questions or you want to join the conversation or share something with us, email instudio101@gmail.com. ronnitechnorr.com. And thank you for being part of the conversation. Hi, Ronni and Jennie. How are you doing?
Hi. How are
Hello,
you?
for having
We're glad to have you here. Why don't we start today with, I think, something that really uh, kind of inspired you both to write the book, which is this idea of injury to the sibling bond. Maybe you can tell me a little bit about how that happened in your family to start with.
Wow. I think to understand the trouble in our relationship, you have to talk a little bit about the roles that kids are often forced into when they are young in homes with addiction in particular, but abuse as well, potentially. And that is, I was the oldest. I still am the oldest. I can't get away from that. And I was the hero in the family. I was the child that all the hopes and dreams were pinned on. I was expected to excel in as many things as possible, academically, music. That child is the child that the family can always point to if anybody suspects there's something wrong inside the family. They can go, there can't possibly be anything wrong with us because look at this great kid over here that we've created. And then at a minimum, there is also a scapegoat. And that child is the reverse. That child gets all the psychic garbage of the family dumped on them. And Jennie, as the youngest, that was her role. And so everything is her fault, right? If she would just get her act together, then everything would be fine in this family. And so that's a distraction, right? There's nothing wrong with us, the rest of us. It's this child is a problem. And there can be other roles. We have a brother in between us who was the classic middle invisible child, right? His job was to not make any waves, not make any demands, just go away and not bother anybody. And then there can also be a mascot whose job is to kind of distract in a different way by being funny, just making people laugh, making light, especially in tense moments. And Jennie ended up picking that up as a adolescent. She found that was a way to try to survive our father's anger in particular. So when you're in these roles, you, from a very early age, you're conditioned to that the only way to get approval is to fit into these roles. And so you play them out. And as time goes on, not only are you forced into these roles that don't let you be who you were meant to be, don't let you express all of who you really are, but you are helping to keep this yucky system in place. One of the things that was harmful to our relationship was that as we got older, I started to treat Jennie like the scapegoat too, right? I dumped on her just like my parents did. I said some of the same hurtful, awful things about her that my parents said about her. And so there was a lot to overcome in terms of her forgiving me, right? There's also the potential for resentment, right? As a hero, I get, there's not a lot of positivity in families like ours to go around, but what there is, I got the lion's share of it. And so there could have been resentment for that. Jennie is an exceptionally loving person, and I don't believe she ever felt that way about me. And then there are other dynamics in the family that pitted us against each other, which we can get into if you like. But that's from the very beginning. Kids are set on paths where they're supposed to be different people or serve different roles or functions in the family, and that in and of itself can turn kids against each other.
Well, this is really remarkable. I mean, first of all, I like the way you conceptualize the hero and the scapegoat, and that silent middle child. But it's interesting because obviously you've done quite a bit of self-reflection, Ronni, in order for you to be able to say what you feel you did to Jennie.
Yeah.
Like that you would scapegoat her and treat her in the same way. You were kind of shaped to treat Jennie like the scapegoat.
Yes.
And then your realization that Jennie had this big heart and she was willing to forgive you. But just the fact that you were able to recognize your own role, because not everybody continues to. You may forgive somebody, but you may not want to have any kind of relationship with them if the bad behavior continues. And that is a completely
Yes.
reasonable response when the damage is very significant. So for example, Ronni, if you had decided, well, like, of course, Jennie's the scapegoat. I mean, she's always been the scapegoat and she will always be the scapegoat, and nothing will take her out of that role in my mind or in the manner in which I treat her. Clearly, you didn't do that. You did self-reflection. You came to a new place. And also, there are these beautiful stories in the book in which, you opened your home to Jennie. You wanted her to be part of your life, and you were afraid for what was going on for Jennie in her world when she was a teenager, I guess that was. Can you talk a little bit about that period of time, Jennie?
Yes. I, as a typical scapegoat person, role player, we're conditioned in these roles. It's not like it just starts to happen at age 10 or age 12. It develops, before you're even conscious of your own identity of who you are in the world. So it's I jokingly call it, being in a home with addiction and abuse is like slow cooking a frog. You just don't know any better, right? So I was constantly being told that I wasn't good enough, that I was lazy, that I was slow, and that was because as a kid, I was, my teachers would always say, "Oh, she's so smart," and then, but I was in the slow reading, and it's because I had learning disabilities that were undiagnosed. So when you're told that from, second, third grade on, you develop this low self-esteem, being the scapegoat in the family, being told that you're never enough, you're never good enough. And so I attracted to me, being the scapegoat, people that, and also being a very sensitive, very empathic person, I attracted to me people that typically like to latch on to empaths. And so those would be personalities that would like to further beat me up, and they were personalities very similar to my mom and dad. They were familiar. And so some of the guys that I dated, I didn't date a ton, but a few, one serious boyfriend in high school was kind of running me down the same way my parents did, and it became more charged, became more, the verbal, picking at me became moments of grabbing me by the shoulders, shaking me, squeezing me, driving too fast, and coming close to getting in car accidents. And so these kinds of things were going on. And I, at different moments when Ronni would come home for a visit, I would talk a little bit about it, not, in great detail, but enough that it worried her.
Were you talking to anybody else other than Ronni about all of that?
No.
What
No.
kind of feedback did you get from Ronni about what she was hearing from you?
Well, we were conditioned to not talk to each other. So the fact that I told her anything was really unusual for a scapegoat and a hero relationship. But Ronni was receptive. She shared a little bit with me about her relationship with her boyfriend, who she later married, Jim. And so there was a little bit of bridge building of trust, not in great detail, but we knew that we loved each other. We knew that, we were being told that we're this close, wonderful, loving family. And so we were trying to live that with each other. And we were still in the cycle of verbal, emotional abuse with our parents, and control, tremendous control. And so it was a challenge. It was a huge challenge. But Ronni at key moments was open to trying to have a relationship with me, and what we, at the best, to the best of our ability, a healthy relationship at the moment. And so around the time that she got married was one of those moments where she's like, come up here, come stay for a week or two before I get married, and hang out with me and hang out with my roommate. And it gave me a break, a much needed break. And it was during that time that she was like, look, this is really not healthy. And we really started talking more about it during that visit. And the more I shared,
the more she and her roommate said, holy cow, this is not healthy. You need to get away from this. I said, well, I've been trying to. So I knew that the relationship was causing me pain, but it was very difficult to break out of because I was going through very similar dynamics at home with our parents. And so I knew that I wasn't happy, but I didn't know how to make the change. I didn't know how to find relief. Because we were raised, you don't talk about these things, you don't tell, and so that's deeply conditioned in families with trauma and abuse and addiction. And we also had mental illness. Our parents struggled with mental illness. So we had three really huge problems going on in the family, and it made it very difficult to forge healthy relationships with each other.
Jennie, I just wonder where the strength to break the bond came from for you. And I'm not just talking about with the boyfriend, but because you seemed to have been in a position where you kept getting drawn back into being this child and holding this role. Where did the strength come from for you to really step out of that role?
I knew that I did not want a family dynamics like my parents, as best as I could articulate it to myself. I knew that I did not want a marriage like what my parents had. I knew I did not want the dynamics among the children like what I grew up with my sister and brother. I knew I wanted something different. And that's probably, I wanted things to change. And that's probably where, as I talk about in the book, my struggles with depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts kept coming from, because it's not that I wanted to die. I have a tremendous willpower to live and to thrive. But it's like, I joke with Ronni, I'm like the weed that they kept ripping out of the ground, but the roots kept coming back. I just wouldn't give up. And I think, part of that probably comes from moments of joy in music classes and teachers that were inspirational, and people. It's not that we didn't have a lot of friends, because families like ours isolate. So it's not like we had a lot of people come into the house. It's not like we had a lot of friends over. That was a rare thing. Yes, we had extended family, and those times with the extended family were joyful times. And so it was those moments, I think, with those aunts, uncles, or cousins, or, where there were loving and positive interactions, or with the grandparents. And it was those moments and those different people that gave me hope to keep going, keep trying. I certainly didn't have that hope in our family of origin. And it was Ronni at key moments, me reaching out to her, and at key moments, her being open and receptive and saying, come see me, come to me and let's talk. That was it took both of us being open and receptive to trying to figure out how to relate to each other in a way that we could both live with and be happy with.
And you had this really tough shared experience. So it kind of makes sense to me that the draw to heal your relationship was pretty strong between the two of you, because there were so many layers of control and diversion tactics that were played out. I mean, in reading some of the passages of the book, it seems like your mother would find ways to interfere with the two of you connecting.
Right.
Why do you think she was so afraid of the two of you connecting? Why did she work so hard to keep you apart?
Well, that's part of the addiction and the abuse and the mental illness. By keeping the individual family members separate and isolated and alienated from each other, we'll never get together to talk about the real problems that are going on.
Exactly.
Because they didn't want to have the truth exposed.
No.
Right. Okay. So that's a pretty serious thing. So this was by design one of the strategies to keep you separate. what about your brother? There's a third player in all of this.
Yeah. He was very severely damaged by his upbringing as well.
Right.
In some ways, perhaps more than either one of us.
You had each other in the end.
We did. And we did, of course, reach out to him. In the book, we talk about how we finally, as we're coming out of denial, we're trying to go through what happened to us as we're trying to sort out how to be better parents. I mean, this all happened simultaneously, right? All these things are going on at once in our late 20s, early 30s. And we reached out to our parents and our brothers saying, look, these are the problems in our family. Here are some examples of what we're talking about, right? The addiction, the abuse, et cetera. We've got to do something about this. And, letters went back and forth, accusations went back and forth. And in the end, our brother sort of sided with our parents who did not want to change anything. And I think that, it was just too threatening to them to let go of any of the mythology, to come out of the denial, to, stop pretending. It was just too much for them. Like their lives are just such a house of cards that to admit anything that we were saying was true would be to blow up everything. And those three were not willing to do that.
Right. Well, there's always an excitement about blowing up everything in that, you can actually come clean in your life and start living in a very honest way with yourself. But the level of humility that requires is quite significant. And it also requires the willingness to let that ego structure, this whole idea of the ego structure being what we have built up in order to survive, the difficulties in life. I don't know what your parents went through that they chose addictions and violence. Did you learn much about your parents' family of origin or the things that may have shaped them to be the kind of parents that they were to you?
Yeah, I mean, we do know a fair amount about their own childhoods. And I do know that our mother, at least, did want to do things better than what she felt she had experienced. And there were a few cases in which she was quite explicit about that, where she would say, this is what happened to me as a child, and therefore I'm trying to do this differently as your mom. Some things she told us outright. Some things we know about our father's background too, although he didn't tell us much. Mostly we heard from our mother or our grandmother. Other things we've guessed at. We didn't really go into any of that in the book because we felt like that's not our story to tell. What we tried to say was, I think we say it in the introduction, we know that they had their own traumatic background. We know that they were struggling with their own demons.
In your book, you are incredibly generous and mature in your response to whatever the injuries are that you may have experienced yourself. Can you tell me a little bit about how you developed that kind of more accepting perspective, and also how that perspective has helped you?
I think counseling, you got to start. I feel like a broken record on this. Anyone that asks me, you need to start with a really well-trained counselor who is trained in the mental illness, the abuse, the addiction, because sadly in the United States, that is not a requirement for counselors to be trained. And yet 1 in 4 of their patients have these issues. And it's a huge problem in our country and around the world. It knows no boundaries, socioeconomic classes. And so I was very fortunate to have a really phenomenal counselor that when I really got to the point where I'm like, Ronni, I got to get out. This counselor was helping me through that, on and off through that 1 to 3 years of trying to figure. First, I started trying to figure out what is normal. I wanted to know what normal was as to be a mother. Right. What's healthy? Right. The healthiest thing for my first baby. And from there, it just snowballed into what's the healthiest thing for my relationship with not just my baby, my husband, my sister, and then realizing all of the issues. It's like all the layers of the onion just started peeling away, and the denial was lifting. And for a little while, I was in a little bit of a identity crisis, as Ronni and I were starting to talk to each other, and we were starting to share our memories of what we grew up with, and starting to break that silence, that code of silence. And it just kept snowballing. And so it really, I think, starting with the counseling and then really talking with Ronni, and Ronni being open and saying, you were the identified patient of the family. You were the identified mess. And you're not crazy. And having Ronni say those words to me over and over again, and having us validate each other's memories. Because I would start off saying, I'm remembering some things that that can't be right. It's so awful. And then she would say, oh, I remember that. And I would do the same thing for her. She would say, I'm thinking maybe this was just a bad dream. And she starts sharing a memory, and I'd finish the memory for her because I witnessed it. And so it was that our bond as siblings, and the love that we shared, and the wanting to help each other in our healing process, that just drastically accelerated our individual healing process, but also that healing our relationship. I just cannot imagine where I would be.
Because eventually you realize that the things you are mad at each other about, or the things you've been holding against each other for however long, were not your fault. I had nothing to, like our mother, we talked about our mother controlling things. They refer to that as the triangular communication. Everything flows through one person. So when she does that, so for years, Jennie lived physically near them most of her early married life, and I was much further away. So I would call every week and talk, in the days before cell phones, when long distance was expensive. And she would tell me what my brother and sister were doing. I didn't call my brother and sister. I would just call my parents. And they were doing the same thing. So that left her free to tell us anything she wanted about each other. So I had resentments towards Jennie about things my mother said she did or said or whatever, that years later, when we finally start talking to each other, I find out are absolutely not true, right? So some of the things that we're holding against each other are A, not true, but B, not our fault, because it's our parents who set this dynamic in motion. So that's why we tried to really talk about these various kinds of dynamics and how they can play out, so people might be able to recognize them in their own experience and go, oh my God, it's not your fault. You didn't do terrible things to me. You were the scapegoat, or, it's not your fault. You were mean to me. Everybody was mean to me. That was my job. It was my job to take on that trash. And so if you can start to, talk honestly, and you said the key thing earlier, Dr. Anna, which is you have to stop doing what you were doing. And that can take some practice too, right? We had a lot of false starts where I was trying to be kinder to her. I was trying, and sometimes I would use humor to try to, diffuse the situation, like you do in abusive families. And she would just see what I was doing or saying through the same lenses of our entire life. So she would get really upset with me. And then I would get really upset that she wasn't giving me a chance. I felt like she was seeing me. I could see that she was seeing me through the old glasses. And so I thought, well, I can either walk away, or I can just verbalize that. I can say, I feel like this is what my intent was, and you're seeing it this way, and that's not what I'm trying to do. And can you just give me a break? Can you give me the benefit of the doubt when I'm trying to do X, whatever? And she's like, okay, right? So I have to stop being nasty to her. And she also has to open her eyes to see that I really am trying to do something different. And so it's easy when you get hurt in that way, though, to walk away. There they go again, doing the same damn thing, right? There she is. She hasn't changed a bit.
This is a journey of courage, really, because, when we allow ourselves to stay connected and really hear what is happening, rather than the injury that is evoked, because we all have these very core wounds, and, lower level events can ignite those deep, deep core wounds.
Yes.
When we're in a position that, I mean, the two of you have a history together. So, I mean, those old wounds can get ignited, and you had no intention to ignite it. And yet the very next thing you know, there it goes. It flares up because there's this core injury that keeps getting ignited. And it may be as a result of something very minor, but because the wound is so deep and it feels so raw,
Yes.
it's hard to see it clearly. And I think that's where a lot of people fall into problems with any relationship they might be in. But with the relationship that the two of you have, I mean, it seems to me that there was a tremendous amount of validation and the need for revealing truths, like
Yes.
real deep truth telling
Yes.
in the face of a lot of history that you had to put aside in order to hear what is going on right now in this moment. Like, who is this person for me, really? And
Yes.
really, really being able to grapple with that, not through the filter of mom or alcohol or any of that stuff, right? So that's pretty amazing. I want to read some of the emails that are coming through. So maybe we can have some conversations around that a little bit, because they are interesting. This one is from Mary, and Mary says, hi to Dr. Baranowski. So sad about this. A childhood is supposed to be warm, loving, and peaceful, but so many families are affected by the opposite. May God bless these ladies and their families. Thanks for sharing. True, very true. So many families. What are your thoughts about that? How common this actually is?
I know from practicing in family practice the last 26 years that it's more common than we realize, but people are not given the space or the permission to talk about it. We're raised up to keep the secrets. And then as we get older, you know, most people in society, I think, are uncomfortable and they don't know how to be there for somebody. And so even people that are friends, we have some of us, Ronni and I have some friends that are like, I don't want to read your book. I don't want to know. I don't want to, you know, and it's sad because if we could remove some of the shame that is heaped on the children, the survivors of these adverse childhood experiences, and just accept that this is a part of our society, and create space to talk about it honestly, like we are right now in your program, it would help survivors to realize that it's safe to be vulnerable. It's safe with certain people to disclose, and maybe people would reach out for help a lot sooner than we did.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do think what you're pointing out is actually really important. This idea that not everybody is in a position to hear or understand. Not everybody is in a position to lean in towards those difficult stories or be the landing place for, you know, what you've experienced and what you've gone through. And I always encourage people to look honestly at the people that they have surrounded themselves with, and just ask, you know, is this relationship actually nourishing? Do you feel safe here? Is it nurturing? Do you feel like you can share with this person? What would happen if you were struggling? Do they have the capacity even to show up? Like, there's lots of people that do have that capacity, but the reality is that, you know, when we come from places where, you know, the people that were surrounding us could not, then sometimes what we do is we surround ourselves with people who cannot. And that is a very, very lonely place to be.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's just important to kind of really recognize that, you know, we get trained by the situations that we grow up in, and we can change the trajectory of our life going forward. I mean, I love what you wrote at the very end. This is you, Jennie. You wrote the ideal that you're striving for, every moment trying to make the world a better place by radiating love, energy into the world, whether it's with our families or it's a 30-second interaction we have with someone we're purchasing something from. It's a joyful way to live. And you go on to write about this realization that if you could have said to Jennie of 27 years ago, the words you would have said were, "It will get better. This mountain of pain you're living with will slowly crumble. You will come to a place where you're no longer contemplate leaving this world early. You will rejoice in waking up every day and experience moments of love and peace each day." I'm not sure I would have believed it. I'm so grateful to be in this place now, sharing all these amazing experiences. Like just the idea that, you have embraced this idea that your life can be about the joys and the gifts, and just wanting to encourage other people to see that that is a possibility for them as well. So thank you so much for that message, because it's one that people definitely need to hear. Here's another email. This is from James. James says, "Hi, ladies and doctor. I went through a similar situation in my childhood. This is why self-harm and suicide are so prevalent in children's lives." Thank you for the subject. What are your thoughts?
No,
Yeah.
sadly, James is right. I mean, there are people who don't have someone to talk to, who just know they're in pain, and want it to stop. And it's as Jennie said, it's so common. And that's it. I mean, as a sociologist, I always want to think about, well, what can we do to stop it? We need to think about this, right? We often focus on recovery, but we also need to spend some time and effort thinking about, why do we let this happen? Why do we as a society tolerate the fact that so many families raise their children in abusive environments? Some of it is support, right? We know from the research that stress contributes to abuse in particular, as well as substance abuse. And so if families were not struggling to ensure that they have adequate food, right, adequate resources to support their families, that would make a big difference. That's a whole nother conversation, a much bigger conversation. But we really need to ask ourselves, if 1 in 4 children experience this, that's a crime. Mm-hmm. Shame on us as a society that we aren't doing more to stop it, right? I mean, it's one thing to help people heal from it, but what if we just stopped it in the first place? Mm-hmm. What if we supported families so that they could, certainly if you're suffering from addiction, you're self-medicating for something else. Could have been your own trauma in childhood, could be something else going on in your lives. What kind of support do we have for people who are in pain, who need to heal from addiction? We need to think much more broadly as a society about the supports we have in place for people, so that we can keep children from having to go through this.
Exactly. Okay. It's interesting, in your book, you write about an intervention. So I'm going to read the next email because it relates to this, and then we'll jump into the intervention, because I think it's an interesting thing. You called it a failed intervention. I have a different perspective on that.
Okay, good.
So here, this is from Monica, and Monica says, "Tears in my eyes for these sisters. Did they ever make up with their parents?" And, I understand that you are not in contact with your parents. And I'm going to read something from the book that you call the failed intervention. And this is Ronni. At the failed intervention, it was just you and me and the 2 counselors with Dad. There was a bed waiting in rehab, and the substance abuse counselor was going to take him. At one point, he did say, "I know I'm an alcoholic." He had his head in his hands and whispered it very softly. And I thought for a moment that he might go. And in the end, he did not. And then there was the backlash. After what you're calling the failed intervention, Mom and Dad joined forces immediately. They were furious with us. Whatever opening or glimmer of reality Dad might have briefly experienced during our meeting with him, we never saw it again. Moving forward, our parents engaged in a campaign to do anything they could think of to try to hurt us. Again, they focused most of their energy on Jennie, the scapegoat. They turned her church into a battleground. They tried to interfere with her counseling, a move neither of us saw coming. And then I understand that the counseling agency basically, said your parents can never come back. But this idea of a failed intervention is really interesting to me, because when I was reading about it, I thought, it doesn't sound like it was failed. It sounds like the two of you had to do that to know that you did it.
Yeah.
Is that?
Oh,
That's an
absolutely.
interesting way to look at it. Yeah.
Because I mean, when I read it, it was like the way that this moment galvanized your relationship with each other, the possibility of your own healing, the manner in which you were able to really be there for each other after that. There was like this pivot. It's like, okay, we did it.
Yes.
And we're not responsible for this part anymore. We've done what we needed to do.
Exactly.
So what are your thoughts of that?
I think that the intervention, unfortunately, was not successful for our father, which and that's why we think of it as failed for him. But for us, we spoke our truth. We were completely authentic and honest, and so it was liberating for us, because we came forward and really spoke our truth with him.
And so brave, because you gave him the opportunity. You said, listen, we care enough about you that we want to help make this recovery a possibility for you. And he said, no, I'm not doing that. I mean, with his actions, he said, no, I'm not doing that. He didn't say it necessarily with his words. So, congratulations for having the courage to do that. Not everybody can. But the two of you were very brave in moving that forward.
I really appreciate that reframe.
Yeah, because
I really do.
No, because it really sounds to me like it freed. It felt like a complete pivot in the book. Like you were now free to allow yourself to heal and not take responsibility for his illness anymore. Right. And I just loved that moment in the book. It was so beautiful. Somebody's asking about the book. This is from Cameron, and she says, "Hi, Bear Psychology." That's the name of the podcast. They have a book out, ? Yes, it's called Healing Begins With Us, Breaking the Cycle of Trauma and Abuse and Rebuilding the Sibling Bond, Ronni Tichenor and Jennie Weaver. And it is available on Amazon and on your website as well, right? And can you say the name of your website right now?
So our website is just ronniandjennie.com, RONNI, and Jennie, JENNIE.
Right. And so if people are interested, you could just type in to any Google search, Healing Begins With Us, Breaking the Cycle of Trauma, Abuse, and Rebuilding the Sibling Bond. The links to purchase the book are also available on our website, bearpsychology.ca, and you can just look for the resources radio show. So
there's an audiobook that's available on Audible or iTunes.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Oh, that's great. That's a really nice way to take in a book. You can go for a walk or so many other things. I love it. This is from Dawn, and Dawn says, wow, hello, Dr. B. The issue is with millions of families in the world, and it is not really touched upon regarding this type of trauma. Very interesting to hear the story of these two very brave women. Blessings to you. So blessings to the two of you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. It's nice because you start to realize that, your goal was to have people hear and understand what this issue is about and start to open the conversation about this really important topic. And it is a hugely important topic. So it's great, like really great that you're talking about it. Okay, now we go back to your brother. This is from Bob, and Bob says, hello, Bear Psychology. These ladies talked about their brother. How's he doing? Do you want to talk a little bit more about that? Anything extra you think people need to understand about that relationship, or how your brother's doing, or anything you want to say about him?
I would go ahead, Jen.
Okay, I would say that sadly, some relationships are so damaged that we cannot repair them because the other party does not want to enter into the relationship to do the work. And I think that's true in any relationships that are touched with mental illness, addiction, and abuse, especially abuse. And so we wish him well, we love him, and that may be hard for people to understand. We love our parents, but at some point, in order to proceed with your own healing, you must step out of range and stay out of range if the other party is still being abusive towards you. I don't see how someone can heal if they remain in a dysfunctional relationship like that. So we don't know. We haven't heard from our brother in years, but we hope that he is finding healing in his own way.
Good. Yeah, I hope he finds healing too. And you're so right. We have to tread carefully and know what our role is in any given relationship. And it's not always to move forward. I mean, you have to be able to see what is safe and healthy for yourself as well. And, what would you suggest to people listening in terms of what are the things that you feel are signs that it is safe and healthy to either allow yourself to be in a relationship or to realize this may not be safe or may not be safe at this time?
I think I would just underscore what Jennie and I talked about earlier, and that is that you have to have a sincere desire on both sides to make the relationship better. That has to be a shared goal. And you also have to, so that's the goal. And you make this pact, you're going to try to move forward and treat each other better. And in some cases, you might have to explicitly articulate, what is it you want me to do? What is it you don't want me, right? It hurts me when you do this. I'd like to have more of this, right? But you just have to, you have to be willing to be vulnerable in some cases, right? To talk about how deeply you've been hurt and why it's not acceptable to do certain things anymore. And as long as you're both willing to kind of step by step, slowly, move forward in that process, then I think there's hope for a relationship.
Well, I just love what you said. It's a mutuality and a recognition. And it's interesting, Ronni, because you actually started with that, exactly with that, by saying, like right at the beginning of the show, you said you basically owned the fact that you were treating your sister, Jennie, like a scapegoat, and you were going to recognize that and take ownership of it, rather than expect that, Jennie should just stay in that role for your comfort.
Oh, right. Absolutely.
Yeah, that just takes enormous maturity. But if you weren't able to do that, I mean, I would just have to say, I wouldn't imagine that it would be safe for Jennie to stay in a relationship with you. But you described it so eloquently at the beginning of our conversation today, with such humility and kindness toward your sister. Like, it was really sweet to hear it.
Well, she's a very kind person towards me. And I always feel like she's been very, very generous in her forgiveness, right? She actually was pretty quick to forgive me. And it's, that happened years and years and years ago, but it's really hard to forgive myself because I feel like I don't like to think that the kinds of things I did to her when I was a kid, or maybe even a young adult, an adolescent, are reflective of who I really am. Because I think I'm a kind and loving person, but those actions don't really reflect that, or some of those actions don't reflect that. And so it's been very helpful for me to sort of process that because of her kindness and generosity, right? I mean, it could, as I can only imagine, as a scapegoat, it would be very easy to for a pretty lengthy period of time keep throwing up to your sibling the terrible things. Yeah, but remember when you did such and such, right? You owe me, or whatever. I mean, there could be all kinds of ways that could go sideways as you're trying to move forward. And Jennie's generosity in saying, okay, pretty quickly in our efforts to say, okay, I see that you're really trying, and I'm not going to hold those things against you anymore.
Wow. That it's just such a kindness. And when I hear the way in which the two of you really faced all of this, because I mean, this was not an easy situation, and you were both kind of carrying old storylines that, you know, you were drawing from. I have another email that I wanted to read, and now it's disappeared. I'm sorry. It was a longer one. Let me see if I could find it. Here it is. This is from Lisa, and she says, "Hi, Anna. I was afraid to listen to the radio show today because I was so scared I was going to be triggered. And this hits so close to home. I was and still am the silent child and the scapegoat. I understand the feeling of never being good enough. I was selfish too, because I dared to verbalize my needs. I've only just discovered that the personalities of almost my entire friend group are similar to the personalities of my family. The roles in these are that I have to be there for everyone, but there is no prerequisite for others to show up for me. I'm trying to change that. I understand the painful illusion of a close and loving family and how painful this is when you're carrying the brunt of everyone's pain and shame and suffering and lies, and you're expected to act as though everything is just perfect. My siblings refuse to look at these things. I'm sure they are afraid. I'm shunned by my family of origin and some of the extended family they speak to. It's a very lonely place. I've worked so hard to step away from this. I do not believe that I would ever be able to trust these people again. With my family and my children, I have put every ounce of energy into being deliberate with my speech, with my actions. One of my most amazing parenting techniques was to do things exactly the opposite of how I experienced things, and it worked. But after this experience of secrets, abuse, and pain, I'm left with lots of grieving, shame, and a huge emptiness. I think you are both amazing. I'm going to get the book. Thanks for your honesty and sharing. Your thoughts?
Oh, well, first of all, my heart goes out to you, Lisa.
Heart goes out to her. Yes, I just sending you so much love for your healing journey. It's a difficult path, especially. I mean, I feel everything that she has said. I understand, and I have felt that, and I see you.
We've experienced. I mean, we do have each other, right? That seems to be different from Lisa's standpoint. We do have each other, but our mother decided that her Christmas card was the perfect venue to tell everyone she ever knew, our entire extended family, lifelong, acquaintances, and so on, just how terrible, rotten her daughters were for cutting them out of her life and stealing their grandchildren away from them. And so we don't really have any family that we're in contact with at all. We just really have each other. So it is hard, right? It is difficult, and we'll be perfectly honest. For years, we do talk about this in the book. For years, we would call each other on our mother's birthday, our father's birthday, our brother's birthday, their anniversary, like we would just be down. We just knew that it was going to be hard because, what kind of person doesn't have any family, right? What kind of person doesn't have contact with the people that are supposed to be closest to them and love them? There's a lot of shame and potential judgment around just that piece of it. Never mind what happened to you, right? I mean, many times I felt like I have to justify to people why I don't have contact with my parents. They would shame me by saying, "Oh, my parents are dead. I would give anything to be with them." Well, yeah, they're probably different people than my parents were, So that's another whole piece that people don't often think about is, as you're trying to heal, as Jennie said, the most kind thing you can do, not just for yourself, but for them, because as long as we participate in the dysfunction with our parents by having contact with them, there's no chance they're going to heal. Now, there's no guarantee they're going to heal since we stepped away. And to be honest, we've seen no evidence of that, but at least they have the opportunity. Whereas if we're still doing that same old dance together, playing those same roles, they're not going to get any better, and certainly not going to help us. So it is hard. We absolutely we feel for your suffering around that piece of it, because it is
Yeah,
difficult.
it's so it's such a lonely place to be. And I think you're right when you talk about, these perceptions in society where people are like, oh my God, you don't have a relationship with your parents. What's wrong with you? It's like, you got to have a relationship, or whatever notions do not align with the experiences that the two of you had in growing up, and what it would take to not get dragged down into kind of a devastating cycle of abuse that you may have taken into your own families had you not been able to pull yourself out of that cycle. And it takes enormous courage, because you're right. I mean, as human beings, we're social, and we tend to thrive when we have loving and wonderful people around. Now, the two of you are really fortunate. You do have each other. You happen to be biological sisters and siblings, and I'm really glad that you found your way back to each other. My experience in working with a lot of people who come from backgrounds where there's very significant trauma, and it's really not safe to have those family relations, is that there are ways to build community that go beyond biological family, and that there are a lot of people who have worked on themselves over years to get to a place where they know themselves well, they're pretty stable, they're not reactive, they don't get drawn in by drama. They want good and healthy and loving relationships, and people are hungry for that. Mm-hmm. And so, I always really want to encourage, the listeners and people in general, try to be open to individuals who are really motivated by bringing love and light into the world, and be that love and light yourself.
I totally agree.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So, there's a lot in this book that kind of exposes relationships that keep things unhealthy. The one thing that we didn't talk very much about was codependency, but it figures very prominently in your book, both in terms of your mother-father relationship and what you witnessed and how you were shaped by your experiences growing up may have easily created codependency in either of you, and maybe your brother as well. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts about that?
Oh, absolutely. And I would say in my early years, going back to that email, I had what I came to call project relationships, where the relationship was built on what I could do or give to the person, and there was nothing coming back to me. Mm-hmm. So I, that it took time. And as an empathic, intuitive person, I still attract needy people, but I am
even today.
Even today.
So how do you discern, Jennie, that this is not going to be healthy for you?
I can tell by the way the conversation goes in the very first conversation. And I try to be gentle, and I try to be kind with those people. I have become a person who needs a lot more alone time than I ever used to in my younger years. I want to have time to be still, to be quiet, to go for walks outside, to spend time with my pets. And so I have become much more comfortable with my own company, and at times prefer it. I still am I'm still working as a nurse practitioner part-time, and I give to others that way. I volunteer at church in the choir, and they are truly family members to me. I have known some of these people for 30 years. So I choose very carefully the people that I wish to spend my time with. And I enjoy my time with my family as well. because those are very loving and nurturing relationships. And so I would rather spend time alone than be giving and pouring out my energy to others in need all the time. I don't do that like I did 25 years ago.
Beautiful recommendations as well as toward a life well lived. Any other final words, Ronni and Jennie, about that you want to share with our listeners? We're going to be done in about a minute, and I want to just remind people the book is Healing Begins With Us: Breaking the Cycle of Trauma and Abuse and Rebuilding the Sibling Bond by Ronni Tichenor and Jennie Weaver. Any other thoughts?
I'd just like to say that, it may seem really scary to try to come out from under something like what we experienced. There's a lot of shame, there's a lot of pain, but it's so worth it, right?
Yes.
And living under that is miserable. The work
Yes.
that it takes to get out of it is less than the work it takes to live with it.
Even though it's terrifying. I wish everybody a great, gentle day. Thank you for joining us today, both of you, and be well. And I hope your book will reach a lot of people.
Thank you so much. It was great to be with you.
Be well. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with your host, Dr. Anna Baranowski, right here on Reality Radio 101.